Capstone Software was a development team that made a few different games throughout the early to mid 90s. The only things these games had in common is that they were first-person shooters, and that they pretty much sucked across the board. They lacked polish, creativity, and technical proficiency. You know, pretty much everything required in making a good game. Ask anyone who's played William Shatner's Tech War and they'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, none of their games really deserve their own review, so what I've decided to do is the next best thing. Combine 3 into one video. I've chosen the 3 that I played most in my childhood, and these are Corridor 7, Operation Body Count, and Witchaven. Corridor 7, released in 1994, was Capstone's first FPS game. You play a soldier moving floor to floor in a large military base, clearing the building of aliens. When you kill a certain amount of enemies, the game allows you to progress through to the next floor.
Elevator clearing acquired.
You can kill the remaining enemies if you wish, though all this affects is your overall score and nothing else. The game is very similar to Blackstone and Wolfenstein 3D, and it even runs on the same engine. You only have a few weapons, which are all based off the typical pistol, machine gun, and minigun archetypes that most FPS fans will be familiar with. Instead of using keys or access cards to open locked areas, you have to unlock them using computer terminals. Aside from that, the game also uses a minimap to help you locate the remaining enemies. On the higher difficulties, these enemies appear as red dots indicating their positions, and on the lower difficulties it also shows the entire layout of the level itself, which can ruin the overall atmosphere. But on the positive side, it also means the game is a little less tedious, as whenever you get bored in a certain floor, it's easy to see which aliens are still left alive. Overall, this game isn't too bad. Its concept just revolves around going from level to level killing aliens, and you can't really knock it for that. It's colourful, the guns are fun to use, and for its time, it looked and sounded pretty good. It's not amazing by any means, but it's not exactly horrible either. Corridor 7 used to kind of creep me out as a kid. The aliens make these really bizarre sounds when they see you, and some of the enemies even camouflage themselves as furniture and other objects. As well as that, seemingly at random, there's a chance this weird, spooky looking face will pop up on the screen, which always catches me off guard. The only real issue with this game is that there's just not much variety in the enemies. They pretty much just run around and shoot at you. There's a couple of vision mode settings that have no use whatsoever, and this was a little bit of a wasted opportunity in my opinion. They could have had alien types that only showed up in certain vision modes, which would have given the shooting loads of depth. Generally, the only thing you use it for is to see stealthed enemies, but these guys reveal themselves when they attack you anyway, which kind of makes it redundant. But it is what it is, and from this promising start, you'd expect Capstone Software would have learnt from their mistakes and continued improving their games. Sadly, that wasn't the case, as you can see with their next game, Operation Body Count. The basic plot for Operation Body Count is that you're a Special Forces soldier that has to infiltrate the UN building and eliminate all the terrorists inside. Much like Corridor 7, the game revolves around going from level to level, killing a certain amount of enemies before you can progress onwards. This time, instead of going down, however, you move upwards until you reach the top. On certain floors, you fight alongside other soldiers who will help you out in gunfights, though most of the time these guys are really slow moving and utterly useless. It doesn't take much playing before you realise that Operation Body Count is really in a league of its own in terms of shittiness. It's just amazing how fucking bad this game is, and I really don't know where to start with it. How about the fact that the first 10 levels of the game take place in a sewer with no lighting? And what about the horribly bad sound effects? Or the copy-pasted layouts floor to floor? The game never indicates how many enemies you have to kill to finish a level. As far as I can tell, it's usually 30 or so, but I honestly have no idea. When you do finally get out of the sewers and into the UN building, you discover the elevators are blocked by booby traps, which blow you the hell up if you go too close to them. I have no idea how you're supposed to get past these things without cheating. I've tried killing every single enemy in the level, and they still detonate when I try to pass them. There is little to no information on this game online, so for all I know, it's a game-breaking bug that one of the genius programmers at Capstone Software was just completely oblivious to. Visually, it's absolutely atrocious, and somehow they've managed to make it look worse than Corridor 7. Enemies are literally just a complete mess of pixels. I mean, look at this guy, what the hell is he supposed to be? There's not even any thought about the scale of things in relation to the overall design, and most NPCs are bizarrely tall, completely out of proportion with the environment. Conceptually, it sounds kind of cool, I'll admit that much. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Die Hard, though I don't recall John McClane having to fight giant sewer rats and slime monsters. The only real moments that are slightly enjoyable are when you get your hands on the flamethrower, but this happens so late in the game that most people will have given up long before then. There really are no redeeming qualities to this game. It sounds bad, it looks bad, and it's got horrid level design. And a mere year or so later after this abomination was released, Witchaven is unleashed on the market as well. This time, Capstone decided to try and cash in on the whole Heretic/Hexen craze of the mid-90s. Much like Hexen and Heretic, it's a dark fantasy game where you play the role of a warrior type, heading onto an island inhabited by monsters and other assorted evil creatures to pretty much just kill everything that moves. The general aim for each level is to locate a pentagram that will unlock a portal, allowing you to move to the next level. Witchaven's most unique feature is that its combat is almost entirely melee, save for a few spells and a horribly inaccurate bow, that is about as useful a weapon as a fucking bird's feather. Most of the enemies are melee based too, which makes me think that they made the ranged weapons crappy on purpose, to force you into using close range alternatives. Or maybe they just failed at coding the bow properly. I'm more inclined to think that it's the latter in this case. Now, while there are a lot of weapons to use in this game, from simple swords to axes and pikes, the dilemma is that there's not really anything differentiating them from one another. With the exception of the short sword the player begins with, every single weapon takes usually anywhere from 2 to 4 hits to kill. They're not necessarily faster or slower than each other, they're all just kind of the same. I mean, you'd expect a battle axe to have a greater reach than a broadsword, for instance, but there really seems to be no difference whatsoever between the two. They're also prone to breaking if used too much, which sounds like a neat idea, but is really just a pain in the ass. Like Hexen, there's an abundance of potions scattered around the levels, which range from simple healing potions to things like resisting fire or turning invisible. There's a few defensive and offensive spells that can be cast during combat as well. It's one of the earliest games to use the build engine, and it actually doesn't look too bad, most things considered. The textures are pretty detailed for the time, and the enemy models show a lot of artistic flair, despite being pretty poorly animated. The level design isn't amazing, but compared to Operation Body Count, it's an absolute masterpiece. You actually move through a level properly now, exploring for keys and items to progress. It's no longer just about killing a certain amount of enemies, it's about actually exploring the environment and finding the exit, and this is a good thing. Witchaven can also be a surprisingly spooky game at times. Mostly due to the usage of sound effects and atmospheric lighting, it really is a dark game, both visually and thematically. It's got a really demonic overtone. I know it's supposed to be about witches and monsters, but it feels more like a descent into hell than into the lair of a coven of evil witches. They've also brought back that randomized face popping up on the screen, just like Corridor 7, and just like Corridor 7, this happens without any warning and never fails to make me shit myself. Also, much like Corridor 7, Witchaven is a game that doesn't really excel in any area, though at the end of the day, it's definitely adequately playable for the most part. If I had to pick any of these 3 games to recommend, I wouldn't recommend any of them to be honest, but I would think that Corridor 7 is probably the most accessible of the lot. It's still a pretty shitty game, don't get me wrong, but there is something kind of universally enjoyable about just going around killing weird looking aliens. It is simple to pick up, and if you ever get sick of it, it's easy to just turn on the auto map and blast your way through the remaining enemies.
Floor secured.
These 3 games kind of defined bad gaming throughout my childhood, and in a weird way, I almost look back at them fondly. You see, before the days of the internet, we wouldn't generally know what a game was like until we actually played it. Before Metacritic and game rankings, we just didn't know what the hell we were getting ourselves into. Capstone Software disbanded in 1996, and we can only assume that that was for the best. It's safe to say that things weren't going to get any better. So hopefully after people watch these videos and realize how bad these games are, they won't fall into the same trap that I did. I guess in a weird way these games are kind of worth checking out if you really do want to see just how bad FPS games can be.